On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Drew D. Brown, Assistant Professor in African American Studies and Sociology at the University of Florida, specializing in the intersections of Black culture and sports. Dr. Brown's current book manuscript explores baller culture, the hip-hop-informed Black cultural expression found in sports. Analyzing sports media from 1988 to 2008, he argues that film, magazines, and commercials became a public arena where young Black Americans negotiated their cultural expression to shape and reshape identities, build community, and gain popularity. The book shows how they deployed a hybrid identity, which was often commodified and misrepresented by the media. Ultimately, the book highlights the constantly evolving nature of Black cultural identity. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Drew D. Brown, Assistant Professor in African American and Sociology, specializing in the intersections of Black culture and sports. How are you doing today, Dr. Brown?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me on here. I appreciate you inviting me and coming on. So I'm glad to be here and glad to discuss some stuff about Black studies.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So, how did you get into Black studies as a field, and what keeps you committed to the field of Black studies?
It's a great question. When I first, I'm actually Canadian, and so I came over to play football on a football scholarship to the States. And when I was in school, I studied economics and business. So that was my undergraduate degree, economics, business, and a minor in math. And what I found is that I really had this passion about developing Black people, Black communities, Black children specifically. And so when I got out of school, played a little pro ball, and then had to go and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was no longer an athlete. I went through a little bit of a transition period that was a struggle, leaving sports behind and trying to pick up something else that I love to do. Well, I had this economic background, and so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the light work. I'm going to alleviate poverty among all Black youth. It was light work, right? So I'm thinking I'm going to cure poverty for all Black youth. No Black youth is going to go through what I went through. So my question was, well, first I got to figure out how Black people got into this mess to begin with. And that's when I decided to go and seek out a degree in Black studies to figure out how we got into this economic mess. So I had the option. I applied to a number of different schools, Morgan State, Clark Atlanta University. I was trying to decide which school I was going to go to, and I decided to go to Clark Atlanta because I had never been to the South. And my uncle from Detroit asked me, do I want to study Black people in the North or Black people in the South? And I was like, there's a difference? And so, I'm from Canada, so I didn't know. So I was like, let me go down to Clark Atlanta and see what's going on with the Black people in the South, studies down there. And thank God I did, because I ran into my mentor, my intellectual father, my Baba, Daniel Omotoso Black, and he guided me through. He guided me through my program, guided me through my own personal development. He was a sort of a Baba to me. And what I found at Clark Atlanta was that through the Africana Studies and Africana Women Studies program down there, is that the rabbit hole is so deep. I'm trying to alleviate all poverty, and then I'm starting to realize, that might be a big undertaking. And so I had to figure out what exactly I wanted to do, what area I wanted to focus on. And my mentor, Baba, he told me, he asked me, just write a paper on sports, right? Why don't you study sports? And I really didn't want to study sports. I didn't want to focus on sports. I'm, a professional athlete coming out. I didn't want to be that guy that would stereotypically just focus on sports, right? I was like, man, that's like Lil Wayne doing a master's on rap, right? It's just, So I was like, I'm gonna do one paper. He's like, all right, give me one paper. And I wrote a paper on the racial integration of professional football, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved the critical parts that I put in that paper. I talked about what Black people should have done in terms of uniting and using their power and their leverage to get more from the NFL at the time. I loved everything that was social issues that I talked about and that I was interested in. I found it in sports. And of course, I already had an interest in sports. And that's really where the light bulb went on. After that, I kind of just I don't say lucked up, but found myself in a PhD program, and I was actually coaching football at the time. I first went into my PhD program as a grad assistant in terms of coaching, but I I found myself really falling in love with the study of Black people in sports, and so went into Temple University and dove, head first into the study of race and sport. I actually did a conference when I was a graduate student at Temple University. It was called Passing the Ball Racing Sports Conference, where I met so many scholars in the area of racing sports. Some of my strongest relationships and colleagues now came from that conference that I threw. I threw it 2 years in a row as a graduate student, one of the only conferences of its kind to this day. Um, but that's how I got into Black studies. That's how I got into the area that I'm in. Um, I my mentor really instilled in me that if I'm going to look at sport and I'm going to do it through Africana studies, there's not many people that are doing it in the field of Africana studies who are really engaged in the study of sport in a critical way in which I wanted to do it. And so because of him, because of his guidance, I give a lot of credit to him, but also the other folks that I had met at the Racing Sports Conference that helped develop me, the other people in the field of Africana studies that helped develop me in this area of sport, who challenged me, who was critical, but the work that I was doing forced me to be then critical and shift from just being a football player from Canada into a real scholar of Africana studies.
Thank you. That's a very interesting trajectory to go from the business and economics to like, okay, I'm gonna cure poverty. And then and
Who you
then
telling? Who you telling? I was sure that I was going to cure poverty. I said, I'm gonna set out on this mission, and got a rude awakening when I started to realize a lot of the systemic and institutional issues that contribute to this. I didn't really know the extent of it, and so I was kind of jumping in blind, but I quickly realized what I was getting into, and I was a quick study. I learned quick and made the necessary changes and adjustments, and made it on my way.
so you got your PhD at Temple, which is a very particular Black studies department, program, legacy, and history behind it. Um, how does sociology come into the work that you do since it is a more traditional and distinct discipline?
I think that's a great question because I have, certain views and approach when it comes to these traditional disciplines. I come out of Temple University where at Temple we're really taught that one needs to engage in this disciplinary suicide. Where if you're going to then take on Africana studies as a discipline, and that's what it is, right? I want to kind of sidebar this kind of idea that Africana studies in and of itself is a discipline. What makes something a discipline is that it has a methodological framework that is different than any other discipline, right? And that's how Temple University is able to offer a doctorate degree in this. Temple University is the first program to offer a doctorate degree in Africana studies because it makes the case that it is methodologically distinct from any other discipline. And there are ways and tenets that it holds that I think people need to hold on to these tenets because that's what makes us a discipline. So going back to sociology, I am very multidisciplinary. I can fit, I can do sociological work, but understand that I'm also doing other work as well. I believe my work that focuses on or puts Black culture in the context of sport is very multidisciplinary and stays true to that. The work that I do in sociology does look at how within sport, different groups engage, different people communicate in different ways with other people or are communicated to. But I also look at things like media and how sports media engages how symbols engage and are seen through sports media. That's a communications thing. But I'm also looking at particular cultural settings and environments and doing work like anthropological observation, right? And so my work, really, in terms of its method, is multidisciplinary, and that's what I believe Africana studies is. Now, I think that there are some people that will look at my work and evaluate it with sort of this narrow disciplinary lens. I had one person review some of my work and was really questioning why I didn't add more historical framing to the thing that I was studying. And this person was a historian. And my response was that I'm not a historian. Yes, I do historical work and I put history as it's relevant into the work that I do, but I'm not just a historian. Yes, I look at how people engage with one another, but I'm not just a sociologist. Yes, I engage in media and symbols, but I'm not just a communications person. Yes, I do observations, but I'm not just an anthropologian. What I am, somebody asked me this one time, uh, um, kind of a similar question. What type of scholar am I? And I said, I'm an Africana studies scholar. They're like, yeah, but do you do sociology? I do Africana studies. Okay, what is it more anthropological? I do Africana studies because Africana studies incorporates all of this. Now, I will say though that in Africana studies, we do, and I'll say we do, but the way that I look at Africana studies, I look at it as it being distinct because I do carry some tenets because I'm an Africana studies scholar that other disciplines don't. One of
Mhm.
those things that Africana studies promoted and sort of pushed, I think, specifically, was the censoring of Black perspectives. And this is something, yes, it theoretically you can tie it to other frameworks and things throughout history and throughout sort of academia. But looking at centering Black perspectives allow this prioritizing of the outlook, the logic of Black people and Black communities, and that's one thing that I do that is specific to my Africana studies foundation. Epistemologically, valuing ways of knowing that aren't necessarily traditional or valued in traditional disciplines, right? If I'm interviewing someone and they tell me about how they had a vision that came to them in a dream, that these ancestors were telling them these things, I'm going to value that as data.
Mhm.
That to me is data, right? Because of the way culturally Black people look at those things that are different than other folks. And I think it's important for us epistemologically to acknowledge those forms of data. And in my work, because I focus on Black culture, cultural interpretation is extremely important to the work that I do. Decoding and evaluating symbols through a lens that is based in Black people's thoughts, beliefs, and imagination is important for my work. And it's with these tenets, right? This perspective, this epistemology, this cultural frames of interpretation that build a framework for Africana studies and me as a practitioner of Africana studies. And so, yes, I said it kind of in a long way. Yes, I'm in sociology, but I am also in other disciplines as well. I've worked in a communications department teaching the communication courses. I've worked in other departments as well, but at my core, I'm an Africana studies practitioner and scholar, and that's where my work sort of branches out to other disciplines, but has its own distinction as well.
Thank you. So, how is your work as a scholar and teacher informed by Black studies, right? Like, I know one of the main tenets of Black studies is about pedagogy and teaching. So how does that come into the work that you do at the university?
Yeah, I think that pedagogy in terms of what things we study, the way we set up our programs are important because when Africana studies first came about, the question was what classes are we going to teach, right? And how are these classes going to be structured? I think it's important to develop Africana studies courses in ways that aren't sort of tied to other disciplines. One of the issues with really having um, one of the issues with having programs, and a lot of the early practitioners of Africana studies really ran into this problem. And it was this problem of, as programs, having all of these courses that people from other disciplines are teaching, it makes it too easy for the university then to just break them up and say, all right, well, we don't want to give money to y'all folks anymore. So the people who are in anthropology, why don't you just teach your courses over there? People that are teaching courses in Africana studies that are historians, why don't you just teach your courses in history? And we'll break up this Africana studies program. And I think that's the danger of setting up programs like that. But oftentimes that's how we have to do it as a stepping stone towards towards disciplines and autonomy. And so the way in which I sort of look at Africana studies curriculum is saying, all right, let's set up our curriculum in a way that makes us distinct, that distinguishes us from other departments, that allow our courses to be structured with a curriculum that is not going to be taught in other disciplines, right? I think other disciplines are kind of catching up in a way because they're like, we want to borrow perspective. We want to borrow cultural frames of interpretation. We want to borrow these things and put them into our stuff because Africana studies has something there, right? We got gold or platinum or whatever you want to call it. And other people are starting to realize that and come mining for those things. Um, but the way I do my courses, so I'll teach a course that I think draws a lot of students in. I call those these bridge courses, these courses that will meet students with their interests, race and sports, right? Doing stuff on Black culture. I love the courses that are like Beyonce and Black feminism, right? I think those types of courses are great courses, right? Regardless of how you feel about the titles, they're great courses that draw on students. Once we get students in, now I can start teaching about Anna Julia Cooper. Now I can start teaching about Du Bois. Now I can look at the beef between Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey. And it makes them want to then go and take those courses on Du Bois. It makes them want to take the other courses on Black feminism and womanism, right? I think that these bridge courses are an integral part of Africana studies. Um, I also think that we're not just teaching content. We're we're tasked as I think scholars and teachers to be able to instill into our students this level of academic excellence, this level of understanding how we can be culturally grounded, this idea of community responsibilities. These are the things that I think that as teachers we're tasked with, and this is our sort of responsibility. And so, yeah, I teach these things. Yeah, I teach the content, and I teach them how to put together an argumentative paper, and I show them the ins and outs of an introduction and a literature review and all of that stuff. Yes, yes. But I'm also teaching them the value of work ethic. I'm also teaching in them how to view things that are through a cultural lens and how to instill their own culture within the work that they're doing, within the way they're looking at things, right? And I think that we do these not as academics. We do these things as sort of teachers and leaders within our community.
Mhm.
And so, yes, my pedagogy is all wrapped in all of that. I, as my mentor often showed or did when I was taking classes, and now I do it for my students. Sometimes my students will be taking a test, and I'll just go and put my hand on their shoulder and ask their ancestors to watch them, guide them. And I know you ain't supposed to be, putting your hands on students, stuff like that. But I do it in a way to make sure that I'm bringing my own cultural beliefs in that space. And people will often talk about whether the work that we're doing is really this sort of academic, whether academia is really the place for the work that we're doing. And I believe
Mm.
the work that we're doing goes beyond just academia. This is just the space that we're allotted at this time. This is just the space and the platform that we have right now to do the work that we need to do, even though we're often challenged, even though we go through criticism from academia, even though we go through challenges from the upper administration and financial challenges and things like that. Yes, yes, academia has all of that. And yet, still, this is a major space for us to be able to do the work that we intend to do for our communities. One of my friends and graduate students, another graduate student who I was in graduate school with, Anya Love, who told me, was one of the first to tell me that the work that we're doing doesn't always show up in academia. And our goal then is to try to bridge those things, take the work that we're doing and use academia as a platform to do it. But it can be done in other spaces as well. Academia, it wasn't necessarily meant to be in academia.
Right.
This is just the opportunity that we have. But I would say that then, yeah, some of the things that I do is not in the academic handbook for teaching, right? But it is a responsibility to my community, to my ancestors, to the other practitioners that came before me to be able to help develop the youth and develop my students in these ways. And so, yeah, I push community responsibility, and yes, I push, um, you know, cultural grounding and how to sort of ground your work and your outlook in Black culture. And that's kind of how I instill Black studies within the pedagogy of my life.
Thank you. Um, I think the point, several points that you made, but the point that you made about um, the ways in which bridge courses are really helpful, as well as thinking about how the importance of having a distinct unit and not just having people in other disciplines who may or may not engage with Black studies frameworks, but do work that involves Black people, because Blacks the study of Black people is not always Black studies.
There you go. There you
And
go. But
that,
also, no, that's crazy. It's crazy because as somebody who does Black studies, right? A lot of these departments, and they ran into this historically, like Black studies departments ran into this issue. We still run into it, where just because you study Black people does not necessarily mean you're doing Black studies.
right.
Again, because this is a very distinct discipline. It has its own framework, its own tenet, and but unfortunately, we get into these programs where nobody in the program has a degree in Black studies. And so it's just, it ain't even, and some of them don't even study Black, some of them don't even study Black people. It ain't even just the study of Black people anymore. Some people just Black and studying, and that qualifies them to be in Black studies. It's like, nah, we are Black studies. We not just the study of Black, and we damn sure ain't just Black studying. We are Black studies with its own tenets and its own disciplinary framework.
Absolutely. Um, and the importance of community in that, and not being confined to what may appear in a traditional teaching handbook that's rooted in frameworks that do not take seriously the knowledge systems of Black people. So, especially right now where, we might be going back to less distinct departments and more alternative spaces for Black studies.
No, I say that, but I also acknowledge that we oftentimes have to use the spaces that are available to us, right? And I think that I do give some sort of grace, or I give some understanding to the idea that there are some people who are doing Black studies, who want to be in Black studies programs and departments, who really are in these other traditional disciplines, but I can't hold it against them because they are really doing the work, right, of Black studies. And so I understand that we don't necessarily control academia like that, right? We don't control this space. We're not necessarily always even welcome in these spaces. And so there is some strategy that has to go on through all of this. We have to strategically move, but I can acknowledge that the ideal, in my views, right, is to have these autonomous departments that allow us to do what we want to do and what we're trained to do without challenge or interference from those that don't understand what we're trying to do and what we are tasked to do. and also be able to go beyond just the call of academia to listen and to meet the needs of our community and our culture.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I think the majority of scholars who are doing Black studies, and that's if we're talking about scholars, are, not necessarily in Black studies departments for one reason or another, or haven't necessarily been trained or don't have a PhD in Black studies. I won't say haven't been trained, but don't have a PhD in Black studies. Um, but then if we think about Black studies as a whole, right? Like, there's so many people who are engaging in the work of Black studies outside of academia, period. Um, and so just like you can't confine the pedagogical practices of Black studies to a box that was designed by and for other people for certain purposes. You can't confine what it looks like to be a Black studies scholar or Black studies practitioner to a set of criteria that doesn't necessarily take into reality the circumstances of Black people in this country over time. Or not just in this country, but Black people, period, over time.
And we've seen this. We see this all the time in other spaces and whatnot. How the criteria that we hold for ourselves either gets dismissed, ignored, or devalued. Right? I,
Right.
I, I was I was I was looking at Simone Biles. Right? Probably the best gymnast ever. And do you know that she does some moves that they've actually named after her?
Yep.
And these moves are so intricate and hard, but she makes it look so easy. What they ended up doing is they actually end up devaluing the moves and the score that they give for these moves. They said, we're not going to give as high of a score because this safety concerns with these moves. But she makes it look easy.
Yep.
And so she'll go and do these moves and they'll give her the same score as someone doing some lesser move in terms of difficulty because of the safety aspect of it, right? So let me get this straight. She's doing harder moves but getting the same score as somebody doing easier moves. How does that work, right? And I feel like that's one of the things that happens with Black people, with Black studies, right? With the work that we do, we're going on what we have need for and what we have a call for, and things that are within our framework. But for some reason, those things just get devalued, no matter how brilliant they are.
Mhm.
This is part of the reason why I think that's when I say that we aren't always wanted or aren't always meant to be in academia. What I mean is that the criteria that academia holds isn't always most beneficial to our people, to our communities, and to our needs. And we have to be very careful when it comes to those things because hmm, sometimes that paycheck just can't pay us enough not to not to turn our back and not to undermine the progress of our people.
Absolutely. And I mean, we think about the university as an institution and the adversarial relationship that most major universities have with the surrounding communities. Um, it's not it's not set up. The institution of the university is not set up to engage in community upliftment or engagement in the ways that Black studies as a discipline is.
That's one of the things, right? I think that um, sometimes academia does not want us to engage with the community. Sometimes they don't want us to bring the community on campus, right? But our
Yeah.
community responsibility calls for us to do that. Our community responsibility calls for us to bring in all areas of our community, right? If we're going to move in a collective way, then let's collect, then let's build a collective, right? Right. So if we're going to come and prioritize unity, then let's unite, right? Regardless of what academia calls for. Now, I'm not telling people to go out there and jeopardize their jobs, right? I think what I'm saying is we need to be strategic to meet the needs that we have for our goals.
Mhm.
And I think that many of us can really identify what those goals are. I think the difficulty is how do we navigate these challenges?
Absolutely. So, on that note, what interests or excites you most about the past of the discipline of Black studies?
You know what's crazy is that what really has me as I move throughout my career, what really has me sort of smiling all the time is just how on point our ancestors were, how on point our intellectual mothers and fathers are. Because man, oh man, I find myself going back to the work all the time,
Yeah.
right? I find myself going back in grad school. We had Dr. Norman's humongous book full of articles,
I've
and
got it
when I
right here.
when when I tell you I go back to that thing like some clinicians have their book, I go back to that book, right? Um, because everything was laid out in the different works, right? Not everything, but a lot of things are laid out in that works, right? In their works, right? If I'm going and looking at Dolores Aldrich's book and looking through the book at what people were saying, they
Mhm.
basically lay out all of this and have run into the exact same issues that we run into today. And so, of course, even beyond that, right? Looking at people that aren't in these books, that weren't in the development of that kind of studies, but looking at how they theorize around different issues, I just think, man, they had they wrestled with these things. They looked at these things already, and so that's one of the things that just has me going crazy because we're not necessarily running into new issues, right? Yes, maybe new platforms, maybe new framing, but these aren't new issues. And going back to those things really gives me a great foundation of how to move forward, or at least options of moving forward. Now, in saying that, I know now you're going to ask me about the past, and now you're going to ask me about the future. And in the future, looking forward, I love the way that scholars have been able to take on the I would say take on the task of engaging and navigating these new age challenges. I think one of the things that really intrigues me the most right now is this the work around Afrofuturism. And I'll tell you why, right? I do love technology and all of that stuff, and it's very it can be very quote unquote flashy at times, and I love that too. But one of the things I really love is the philosophical foundation that's built into this question of what if,
Yeah.
right? What if we had these tools? What if these things happen? What if this is what the future looked like? How would we respond? How should we navigate that? Right? Theoretically, if we did have the power, what would we do with it? And I love those questions, right? It allows us to look forward in the future. It allows us to set goals of what we want to accomplish and how we want to accomplish it, given the way we theorize, yes, philosophically. I have this sort of thing that I'm working on now, this sort of theory, right? Very early stages, but I'll kind of mention it briefly. But it's this notion of taking sports as a sort of theoretical or philosophical, um, I would say, training ground where we can look at someone like a Simone Biles who does what she does and say that's just like what we do in real life or outside of sports, how we do things that are so difficult that other folks just devalue in their evaluation,
Mhm.
right? And we can look at sports as a way to sort of navigate challenges. We can look at how things are handled. We look at strategies, game plans through sport and say, that's probably what we should do when we come up to academia and we have the opposition. We should take this game plan on. We should run this play, right? We should run a pick and roll, right? We should run this distraction over here in order to throw the ball over here. There's so many metaphors within sports already, but can we take those metaphors and use them when it comes to Black progress? We
Mhm.
have opposition, that's clear. Well, there are plenty of opposition in sports. Well, what do then teams do? Do teams how do they manage teamwork? How do they manage players who all want to be the stars? How
Mhm.
do we manage these things on teams? Well, I can tell you, I've been into some groups where everybody wanted to be the stars, right? I've been in some groups where it was hard picking the captain. Some groups where we didn't know if one person was just trying to get points or if we were trying to win the game. And it allows us to sort of strategize around the what if, right?
Mm.
Just like Afrofuturism does. That's the future, I think, of some of the work that we're doing here. Of course, Afrofuturism is already kind of going, but this area of looking philosophically, theoretically at things in order to anticipate and game plan around our future, I think is an area that I'm super excited about.
Well, thank you. That I think is a really applicable framework to have. Um, it would be really interesting to see like what that looks like in terms of strategy and how that can be used to an inclusive way of talking about these things and of identifying different scenarios that are currently taking place or and anticipating the scenarios that are going to take place in the near future and far future. Which ties back to what you said about the past, right? And how the stuff is not new. There might be new frameworks, there might be some variation, but all of the things that all the conversations that we're having right now with regards to the discipline and the challenges, those things are not new. So,
And also, the idea of uh, where are we going with this, right? I think that for Africana studies, um, freedom and liberation is really the ultimate goal, right? Um, Permanent and irrevocable liberation and freedom, right?
yeah.
And so when we're looking at that, there are many scholars, obviously, in our past that have articulated what that looks like. But I think it also then allows us, or I think that we should be looking at, even more critically, standing on their philosophical grounding, how we can even be more critical and more specific about what that looks like. Liberation for many folks look different, but I'll tell you, liberation probably won't look like most people imagine it, right?
Yeah.
It just won't. Right? We're conditioned to view the stuff that we see around us and say, we'd like it to be this or to be that. But honestly, what we're looking at is a system that we don't want no parts of. What we're looking at is a system that we want to toss and build anew, or a system that we want to uproot and see the foundations that we have that have been suppressed, that we have created, and rebuild those, right? But oftentimes when we look around, especially in American society, that's not what we think of when we think of liberation. We think of just what we see. Many people do. And I don't think that our liberation is going to look like this. I don't think that our freedom is going to look like this, right? It's going to look like something totally different, because we will have a different foundation, different needs, different everything. And so I think that the work that has come before that only speaks for where we are now, but it also helps us imagine what a future looks like. And I love the way that scholars now are being critical in identifying and structuring sort of this imagination for our future.
Yeah. And that I mean, that ties back into what you were saying about the what if question that's embedded in Afrofuturism, right? Like a and there is an article that I assigned for several of my classes, but it's like let's imagine beyond the limits of the current social structures that we have, and the possibilities that exist beyond just improving our standing in this structure, because improving our standing in the structure, as you said, is not a permanent freedom or liberation. Um, so what does it look like to cultivate a world in which actual permanent freedom and liberation is possible? And the reality is it's not the current world that we live in. So, um,
And that takes a lot of imagination.
A
It takes
lot
a lot of
of
imagination
imagination.
because we've grown up in this. This is what we've seen. This
Mhm.
is all we really know, right? It's similar to the argument around policing, right? We would think that because we've only seen societies where policing happens, we've only seen societies that are able to be sustained with a certain level of policing, right? That we can't even, many of us can't even imagine a
Yeah,
community without policing. But when you solve things like poverty, when you alleviate things like addiction, when you cure things like unemployment, when you do all of these things, right? Then what is the need for policing, right? We can't imagine that. We
no.
can't imagine a society without policing because we've never seen it. But I think that for us, we can look through a certain lens, whether it be Afrofuturism, whether it be through sports, whether it be through the theoretical foundations of the scholars that come before us, and we can imagine a successful way and outcome of things like a society with no police that doesn't have a need for policing, right? And I can't wait for us to take it from academia to more practice, right? Practice is certainly a key step, as 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 folks would say, like pedagogy to prep. Um, Pedagogy is a key step in what we do. It's not just theorizing. It's not just it's conceptual work that we're doing, which does kind of, I don't want to say annoy me about academia sometimes, but I sometimes I do not I don't like it when that's done, when it's just conceptual. We're only speaking to other academics, when we're only circulating things through academia. At some point, we have to engage in some practice, and we have to take it from academia and into communities and into real practice in order to create the changes, the liberation, the freedom that we're talking about creating.
Absolutely. Which aligns with like, I mean, Marable said, Black studies is descriptive, prescriptive, and corrective. Like, if you don't have the praxis, if you don't have the action, then what's the point?
Yeah, yeah. What's the point? But I guess if I can get on my soapbox real quick, this I think many traditional disciplines, but certainly even people in Black studies do this, where we must regurgitate and talk about other scholars' work, and then talk about our work, and then talk about scholars' work, and then and I understand the value of that, but at some point we got to take it out of this circle
Yeah.
and bring it outside of academia to actual real people, real social issues, real practice, and start to implement and implement some of this stuff. Right now, some of the stuff I think we should be creating it to implement it. We should be creating it so that we're using it to inform the work that we're doing out in communities. If the work is only going to stay if the work is only going to stay in the book, I find the work to be pointless. We don't
Yeah.
do work for work's sake. We don't do research for research's sake. We do it for the people's sake. We do it for the sake of liberation, for the sake of freedom. If we're only doing it to get tenure, I think we've missed it. We've missed it. Now, I do want tenure though, but really for security purposes, I told you I'm Canadian. My son get kicked out. But for security purposes, I think that. But more importantly, while I do want tenure, more importantly, I want freedom and liberation. I'll take that over anything. I'll take that over all of it. Right? Muhammad Ali said that one time. He said, he said, I don't care about this belt. He's in an interview, and they're asking him about losing his belt. He's like, I don't care about that belt. He's like he had a yacht sitting in front of or behind him. He was on a deck, and he said that yacht back there, that ain't my yacht. But if that was my yacht, I'd give it up. I'd give it up in a second. I'd give it up, and I wouldn't. I don't care about it because if taking that yacht means that I can't go into the Black community and talk about the Black woman getting raped, then I don't want that yacht, right? And that's the same way I feel about academia. I'm doing this work for the freedom and liberation, particularly of Black people, but really an extension to all people, right? But I'm doing this for that. Now, do I want the paycheck? Yes. Right. Do I want the job security and whatnot? Do I want the tenure? Absolutely. But understand, I'll give everything up. You go if you're going to tell me I'm fighting for the liberation and freedom of my people, right? And I think that's what makes really Black studies separate. I find that there are some people who are only doing the work just to do the work, and I find that part. Um, I'll just say it's different than why I got into it. Right. I won't say nothing else against it, but I will say that's not why I got into it. And
Yeah.
so for me, my priorities lie in freedom, in liberation, in advancement, in progress, in development. The way that I can put my hand on a student's shoulder and make sure the ancestors know I need them to look out for this one. I need them to help guide this one.
Mhm.
Right. Um, that it's important for me to be what I am in my career as a Black Studies scholar, and that includes trying to make sure that our ancestors and their prayers and their words are turned into progress for the students that are sitting in front of me, and for the people that my work hopefully connects with and impacts. And that's really what I am. You know, I'm not. I would say I'm nothing crazier than just somebody who wants to see folks liberated.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to add? Do you have I know you are talking or you're working through um, philosophy of sports or theorization of sports. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your current or upcoming work?
For sure, for sure. What I'm finishing up right now is I'm just finishing up my book, my first sole authored book. It's called Baller Culture, and what it does, it takes a theoretical foundation of Stuart Hall and his look at the circuit of culture, and it applies it to sporting culture, Black sporting culture in the 90s and 2000s. Now, in the 90s and 2000s, that was the rise of hip hop, which is really sort of this amplification of Black street culture in somewhat of an artistic way. Well, hip hop influenced a lot of industries. One of the industries that it really impacted was sports.
Yeah.
And so this sort of Black street hip hop influenced sporting culture, I'm calling it baller culture, and I'm looking at how Black people both promoted it, but also made some concessions in it becoming popular, in getting some benefits from its popularity. It wasn't always that Black people were trying to use it to seek liberation. They were doing that, right? But they were also using it to gain access to other things. And that sort of negotiation of Black cultural or baller culture identity fits right in there, or is theorized by Stuart Hall. And so I look at how he articulates this circle of culture to see how baller culture goes through this transition throughout the 90s and 2000s, and this level of cultural identity negotiation. So that's what the book is on. I think it's going to be a fantastic book that I think a lot of folks are going to like because of the nostalgia of reading about Allen Iverson and culturally aesthetic things like the crossover and how it's tied to African aesthetics like rhythm and call and response and these types of things, or looking at someone's work like Stuart Scott and Scoop Jackson, and how their words sort of negotiated this identity, moving between the desk of ESPN and being able to say words like, or phrases like, "That man is colder than the other side of the pillow," right? I think that this sort of sporting culture of that era, this Black sporting culture, that era that I call baller culture, is fascinating. But it's important to understand that it didn't just happen in a way that was sort of straightforward and linear. There was this sort of negotiation that went on, this adaptation, this appropriation that happened, that came along with its commercialization and its popularity.
Thank you. That does sound like a fabulous book. So I'm very much looking forward to reading that when it comes out. And I appreciate you being here, um, and all of the wonderful insights and perspectives that you shared today. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed talking about Black studies, and it brought me back to the stuff that I was that I was raised in. I'll say intellectually, being able to sort of pull a lot of that stuff in and speak about that stuff. Right, I think that there are not many spaces where I'm able to do that, and so this was certainly a joy to do.
Well, thank you. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and this semester.
Thank you. You as well.